The more economically developed countries are like Canada, US, European Union, um, Australia, and then we have on this particular map, we are seeing the kind of the in-between countries. So the in-between countries are Brazil, South Africa, India, Russia, China. They're also called the BRICS countries. So Brazil would be the B, Russia is the R, India is the I, C is China, and then S is South Africa. That's kind of a way to think about it. They have formed kind of an alliance among those countries to say, hey, we're not kind of in either category, and we are trying to economically develop and do so in a way that is equitable, not only for the people in our country, but for the entire world. Whether or not they actually are successful doing that is really an opinion more than it is fact. But that is the current lay of the land. Now, this particular map is really helpful for understanding global carbon emissions. If you notice, the US is over 25% of global carbon emissions, and that is by far the highest as of the making of this graphic. China is almost up there with us. It's a little bit higher than 20%. China's almost up to 25%, but that's total, that's not per capita. And we know from earlier in the year, that per capita impact is more important than overall impact. So there is an issue with, India and China emitting so much, but per person, it's far lower than it is in the US. So these are the major global carbon emissions countries. And the more economically developed countries have to do more in order to provide support to those less economically developed countries, because we are a larger contributor to global climate emissions that are affecting those LEDCs. So Zainab, I'm not sure I understand your question about the ways that you can adapt to climate change. Got it. So Alaska is just considered part of the US in this map. It's not separately colored. So all of the US accounts for 25%, and that is because of the massive consumption of oil in general in the US. If this were an up-to-date map, you would probably also see some parts of the Middle East also colored in at least the yellow. This is probably about 5 or 6 years old. There has been a tremendous increase in Qatar and some other Middle Eastern countries in terms of carbon output. So I mentioned the United Nations before. The United Nations is this hub, this central piece of how a lot of international efforts are made in order to address both climate mitigation and adaptation. There are conferences that happen, and they are not happening this year, but there are conferences that generally happen every year where representatives from every single country in the world get together and they talk about how can we perform these mitigation and adaptation strategies. The two most famous are the first one and the third one here, the IPCC and the UNFCCC. You do not need to memorize what they stand for. You just need to recognize that these are very important conferences, and they're very important groups. So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is the one that first raised the alarm about climate change about 30 years ago, as far as what changes need to be made in international development. and they continue having all of these panel meetings. And then what arose out of that about 21 years ago is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and that is an annual meeting. It rotates where that meeting is so that every continent is represented. They try to have these meetings in LEDCs so that different countries have the opportunity to show what they are doing in order to try to mitigate climate change and also adapt. This is the kind of thing that is really interesting to follow. There are a lot of speakers, like Greta Thunberg would be a speaker who would be invited to talk at a UNFCCC meeting. A lot of other climate activists speak there. A lot of youth activists speak at these UNFCCs. And it's really a great opportunity, if you do a little bit of research on it, to figure out what's going on with the fight against climate change. Then there is the National Adaptation Programs of Action, and these are happening all over the world. Every country kind of has their own. And so this picture represents a Napa in an African country. I'm not sure which one, but the idea being that NAPAs allow folks to be funded in order to adapt to climate change. So there's money available in order to make some of these things happen. All right, I think we're at time to climb.
Yay.
What do we want to be, Himalaya, space, or underwater?
Space.
Space, the final frontier. All right, I only see 4 players so far, but there's like 9 of you.
Sorry.
Man, without the rest of our spacesuits, we all gonna die. Where's your rat?
All right, if you join a little bit late, that's okay. You can still join us. I think I put 6 questions on this one. Let's get started. Good job, ASAP. Uh-oh. Looks like Mr. Todd is starting to dominate. Great job, Zainab. Great job, everybody. All right. Good job, everybody. Looks good. Any questions about this lecture? All right. You can still ask questions in the chat. What? Oh, got it. The test, I was wondering what a sour quiz was. The test is going to going to be talked about. Mr. Tout and I are going to try to figure out a nice creative way to allow you guys to show what you understand. That is not necessarily going to count the same way the previous tests have, but will still allow you guys to demonstrate your knowledge. Okay. All right. So head out, please, and I hope this should be at the very least really interesting for you to do. I will make no claims to fun because I know that only gets me in trouble. Because then I go, I think this is really fun. Other people go, I don't know what your idea of fun is, Mr. Dutton. And I'm like, I'm a nerd. I like things. So go out to number 154, the generate game. And what I want you opening up is the document. It's going to show up differently for you, of course. The Generate Game student instructions. So make sure you have that opened up.
What assignment number is it?
Number 154.
Oh, it's right at the top.
Oh, and it turns out the only reason my dog came and saw me is because he wanted to go out, and I'm the one who pays the most attention to him. So he figured even though I was like the furthest away in the house possible, he was going to come see me. But it worked. I mean, he ended up going out. It just wasn't me.
Mr. Dutton, Anthony requested that he get placed on a team, but he had to go.
Okay.
So let's just make sure we put him on a team.
Yep. And what we'll do is we'll form teams of approximately 2 because we're going to have 5 total teams. All right. So let me go through this with you real quick. Where you'll see things step by step. So don't worry about this. Fine. Don't worry about the fact that this looks really long. It's just basically giving you all the instructions that we'll go through. It's not as complicated as it seems. So we will get you into 1 of 5 teams. And you see that there are 5 Google Slides attached here. Generate Game, Team 1, Team 2, Team 3, Team 4, and Team 5. Depending on your team, you will be assigned a different Google Slides. And what I will have you do among your team is have you share one of those amongst your team. You can have a chat within Google Slides so you can communicate with each other over Google Slides. If there's another medium that you would like to use, if there's another technology that you'd like to use to talk to each other, then go for it. But that is what I'm recommending that you do. You share the same document, and if you're both on Team 1, then someone chooses who is going to be sharing Team 1 with the other person or people. And that way you're all working on the same document. All right, we'll take a look at those documents in a couple minutes. That's how I want this to work. We are going to go through the intro together, and then we're going to look at the game pieces and talk about why the piece size is significant, and we're going to talk about how you actually are going to use the pieces to play the game. Okay, so we'll get into that in a little bit here. But I wanted you to be familiar with what documents were attached to this. So this game actually comes from the EPA. What does the EPA stand for? And we'll get into teams in just a little
Environmental
bit.
Protection Agency.
Thank you so much, Lena. Thank you, Zainab.
Oh, Zainab got it first, though. She was typing, and that takes longer, so.
It's not a competition. So the Environmental Protection Agency, and not only is there a national EPA, but there are also state level EPAs. So there is the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency that basically makes sure that in the state of Ohio, we are following all the laws that are passed nationally around the environment. And so the EPA, one of the things that they do is education. And so this game comes from the EPA because this is a way for them to try to get people to think about alternative energy and how we individually and as states, as regions, as cities, make choices about how we're going to get energy in the future. All right, so that's why this is sponsored by the EPA, and why they even bother doing this sorts of education is they want you guys to be the decision makers in the future. So we are already familiar with a lot of this. This is a really busy slide, but we already know that we get most of our energy from fossil fuel. We get some of it from nuclear, and we get even less of it from renewables. Our wind, our solar, hydroelectric dams, geothermal, meaning like getting heat from the ground, and biomass, we've talked about that. We know that there are technologies to convert these resources into electricity, all right, like petroleum refineries, like this looks like a coal refinery, but it's along the same lines. Electric power generation, so from wind, all right, from solar, getting that electricity out to everybody through these power lines. And then there's the end piece where this energy is used. It's used in houses, residential. It's used by businesses, that's commercial. It's used by factories, industrial, and it's used by the transportation sector. The last thing to understand about the energy system is that there are energy services. So like what people actually need, what people actually want. So there's mobility, there's how far you can actually travel, all right? There's lighting, there's how much actual light that you get in your house. There's comfort, heating and cooling. So there's different ways to think about the energy system. This seems like a far more complex graph than it actually is. All right, let's step through it real quick. So every one of these colored lines represents, each one of these numbers represents an input, okay? This energy input is then sometimes converted, all right, to electricity. Sometimes it's used directly. And then it goes to one of these four sectors. Sometimes it goes to all four sectors. Sometimes it just goes to one sector. And then it is used in that sector. So for example, energy can be used in the residential sector at home. Some of it is used for lighting, for heating, for cooling, all right? But a lot of it is rejected. A lot of it is wasted. Most of that waste gets output as heat, all right? So we know that we can get electricity to run our light bulbs, and some of our light bulbs run really hot. We can't use that heat. That heat is just excess. It isn't used as light, and so that's rejected energy. The energy that's actually used to light the light bulb is used energy. So again, we have input, the sector it gets used in, and then output. So what they're trying to do with this diagram is they're trying to get you to think about which of these 9 sources matches up with which of these 9 inputs here. So any guesses, educated guesses about which of these 9 correspond with which of these 9? Notice that the thickness of the input corresponds with how much energy is coming from that sector, is coming from that energy source. I think the
these questions inside.
Go ahead.
Are these questions inside a document that we are like supposed to answer, or is this just like?
Nope. I'm just introducing it to you. Good question, Dave. So the easiest one to start with is probably number 9. I agree, crude oil. Yes. So we see that number 9 forms the highest proportion of the energy sources, and a significant proportion of transportation, right? Almost all transportation is dependent on crude oil. Good. So number 9, I agree, looks a lot like crude oil. A little tiny bit of crude oil, you see, is used to produce electricity, but very little. Any other guesses as to what any of these might mean? Ooh, natural gas number 6. I like it. I don't remember what goes with what, but I agree with you that number 6 looks a lot like natural gas. A lot going into the residential, a lot going into the industrial sectors. Coal being burned for electricity. I like that. A lot of coal power plants produce electricity. Okay. I'm wondering which is coal, 2 or 7. Any other guesses? And I don't actually know. I don't actually remember which one goes with which. So we'll find out together. I like number 1 as solar. I'm also wondering if maybe it's a little bit bigger proportion. It might be number 4. Yeah, maybe geothermal, because we know that there's very little geothermal currently. And that also has a line going straight to residences. All right, so without further ado, let's take a look. Oh no, number 1 was solar. Sorry about that, yes. Good job, Alanis. Number 7 was coal, number 9 was crude oil. Good, wind was number 4. I think you said that before I switched the slide. Biomass is number 8, surprisingly. All right, natural gas is number 6. So we had geothermal as number 5, or we didn't, but geothermal is number 5. So I hope this demystifies how to read this kind of graph. Yeah, I am surprised solar is so small as well. I'm not sure when this data is from. I wonder if it's outdated. But I hope this demystifies how to read this kind of graph. These are very important graphs to be able to read as far as understanding systems. And of course, this course is all about understanding systems. So if you can get a good handle on how this works, on how this kind of graph works, it really helps you look at data in the future. All right, you have reference to this, so you can always see this later. But understand that, you know, we've talked about this, that it matters what energy choices we make. We know that NOxes are huge air polluting. Carbon monoxide, SOxes, particulate matter. We've talked about all these things. We know these are major air pollutants. We also have, of course, carbon dioxide being the major greenhouse gas. This is not saying that 97% of the greenhouse gases is carbon dioxide. I believe it's saying that 97% of carbon dioxide ends up having an impact on the atmosphere, whereas 42% of methane and 12% of NOxes. Now, water use is also significant. We may not get to it in this game. We're going to spend a few days doing this, so a couple days next week. But 51% of total surface freshwater withdrawals, meaning like freshwater withdrawals, meaning for drinking water, for shower, for any sort of potable source, 51% of any of that freshwater that is used in the electric power industry in order to heat up the water, to create steam, to spin a turbine, or to cool down a nuclear power plant. That it requires a tremendous amount of water. So this is another impact that even as we transition to more renewable sources, we have to still take into account water use and its impact on our freshwater supplies. So this Generate game that we're going to do virtually is a game of energy choices. It's a simulation. It helps us see what are some of the challenges and trade-offs that we have to make in making energy choices. Each team has the same total energy, but you do not have the same mix of energy pieces. Your goal is to fill the game board with the energy types and achieve the lowest total score. All right, your total score is going to be calculated by adding up the purchase cost of each technology that you choose, plus the operating cost of the technology, meaning how much it costs per year to actually use it, plus, and this part is going to change over the course of the game, the cost of the carbon dioxide. Some things have a higher carbon dioxide cost, like coal and natural gas. Some things have zero carbon dioxide cost, like solar or wind. So clearly, depending on the cost of carbon dioxide, using a more renewable technology is going to be better or worse. Yes, I agree, Lena. Seeing how little renewable energy we use is sad.
I meant to type that, or I meant to like send that. I had it all typed out and then I just forgot to hit like enter.
No,
so
that's okay.
That was went for like 2 minutes ago, so if we can just rewind.
No, it's good input.
Yeah, sorry.
So in this game, you guys are the decision makers. You have a game board. All right, that's going to be slide number 1 is going to be your game board. And you're going to use this game board for multiple rounds of gameplay. You can think of yourselves, your team, as a town, state, region, or country. So you can name yourselves whatever you would like. You could be Ohio, you could be Cleveland, you could be South Africa, you could be Beijing, you could be whatever you want. And then you will be covering the grid with the energy sources that you have on the remaining slides. We're going to take a look at one of those slideshows in just a minute. These are the images that you are going to drag to that grid. You're going to cut and paste them is how we're going to do this. And then you'll fill in your grid with these variety of cards. No copying and pasting. You are given a specific quantity, so no making more of anything. You're not allowed.
Man.
Yeah, I will be disappointed in you. That's the punishment. So each team will have a different mix. Here's how to read these energy pieces, and this is something that we'll come back to. So I'm going to leave this slide up so that we can switch back to it. In the red, in the upper right-hand corner, is the purchase cost. How much is it going to cost you? Don't worry about what this is. It's not like dollars. It's just a relative cost. how much it costs you to build or purchase the technology in the first place. Carbon dioxide emissions is in green in the bottom left-hand corner. How much carbon dioxide it takes to produce every year. And then the annual cost, how much it costs to operate, is in the bottom right. So you should make decisions around purchase cost, carbon dioxide emissions, and annual cost. We are going to assume that every technology will last 30 years. So we'll be taking the purchase cost plus the annual cost times 30 years, plus the carbon dioxide cost times 30 years, and getting a total cost. This will all be done automatically in a Google Sheet. You do not actually have to do the math. What you need to do is estimate what are the best technologies to use based on the round. Every round, there's going to be a different carbon dioxide cost. And you will have different rules for every round. All right, so before we play some rounds of Generate, let's take a look and tell you what, let's take a look at one of these slideshows first, and then we'll separate into teams so that you know what you're looking at. So this is for team 1. Here is the grid. The grid is on slide 1, and I made it so that it's the background, so you can't accidentally drag the grid anywhere. The grid is just going to stay on that slide. Slide 2 is your scorecard. What you need to do after every round is that you need to count like how many nuclears you use, how many coals you use, how many winds you use. This is a way for you to keep track because this is what you're going to have to report to me. So it's your personal scorecard. All right. At the bottom here, I will give you a score and you'll put in that score. And then I'll give you a rank, whether you're first, second, third, fourth, or fifth. Okay. All of the remaining slides are your pieces. These are all images, so you can move them around. And if you want to put them on the game board, go ahead and cut them and then paste them onto the game board. They will fit on the grid. Make sure they align to the grid so that they take up the appropriate amount of space. Do not resize them. All right, I could not lock these down to make sure that you couldn't resize them. Don't cheat. I'll be able to see all your slideshows, and if you're going like, oh, I made coal nice and small so that I can do lots of coal, I'll know. All right, don't change the size, okay? So you see here that this team has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 coal, carbon capture, and storage. This team has 8 normal coals. This team has 5 existing coals, meaning there's no cost to purchase this because it already exists in your region, state, or country. Here we have solar power, and this solar power, we'll talk more about this, but this solar power requires batteries, or it has batteries attached to it. So that means the solar power can be stored as opposed to having to be used immediately. This is large solar panels. These are small solar panels, mini solar panels. All right, they are cheaper and they cost less to operate per year. Here we have natural gas. You see that there's a lot of natural gas available on this team's options. Here we've got wind power with storage batteries. So it allows for that energy to be stored when it is not being needed. Here we have large wind power, big honking guys, and then we have small wind power. All right, and it costs less and it requires less to use per year. This one is currently being skipped. You see that it's got the I with the slash through it. We will use this in a later round, so you cannot use this for the first couple rounds. That's why it's skipped. When you're ready to start using it, you can right click and you can unskip it. So,
Mr. Dutton,
yes.
do the pieces get replaced every round?
You will have to go through the laborious task of moving the pieces back out of the grid. But every round, the rules are a little bit different. There's a couple of the rounds where you need to keep everything in the grid as it is, and you'll just replace a couple of them. Okay? So for a couple of the rounds, yes, it will be having to cut and paste. And I don't care if they end up organized back into these slides. If you just want to cut and paste everything back onto one slide, that's fine. Just don't make more of anything, please. All right, so I know that I went pretty quick. I want to get everyone onto Teams, and I want to get you playing around with this a little bit. So what you are going to do, we talked about steps 7 and 8. What you are going to do for round 1 is that you are going to use your energy mix to achieve the lowest possible score. This round 1, carbon dioxide will not count. So that green number you can ignore. Carbon dioxide costs will not be factored into this round. All right. So when you get your team, we'll cycle from team to team and try to help you out. But when you get your team, try to figure out what you want to start with. So let's just go, I don't know, I'll go alphabetically on my list. How's that? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of you. So Akia and Alanis, can you guys be team 1, please? Team 2 will be Arden and Dade. Team 3 will be Isadora and Lena. Team 4 will be Maiwand. Team 5 will be Zainab. And Anthony will join Maiwand. The next person up will join Zainab. What I recommend you do is that, let's say, whoever responds first on the group chat will be the one in charge, will be the group leader. So whichever of Akia and Alanis responds first, please share it with the other. Share your version of team 1 with the other one. Whichever one of Arden and Dade responds first, share your version of team 2 with the other one. Whichever of Isadora and Lena responds first, share team 3 with the other. Jonathan, will get started with CS in just a couple minutes. Maiwand, you're on team 4, and Zainab, you're on team 5. So make sure you have the appropriate one open. Lena, you're on team 3 with Isadora.